to me, I'm still serving. I mean, like you are. I mean,
Yeah.
there's something about being in the military. I mean, I come from a military family. My dad was a Marine. Well, is a Marine. He's 92. But you know, I feel we're called to serve. I feel really good that I feel now that as I move toward the twilight of my career, if I can give anything to our PIOs, if I can help them, I think I've done something. We have a purpose, you know. We defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic. What greater job could there be?
Hey guys, this week we have a phenomenal episode with Dr. Joe. You know, Dr. Joe served in the military. He was in public affairs afterwards and has done a ton of training and now selling to the government. He has a crazy, awesome story. I really enjoyed talking to him, and really, you probably could tell when you hear this. You know, as a retired military guy, whenever you put two of us into the room, it doesn't matter what service, you know, some of that magic comes back from when you served and you bonded and you have had a mission. And now we're both kind of doing similar things where he's selling to the government, he's providing his training services, and I'm helping small businesses sell to the government. So still both feeling that call to provide in whatever small contribution that we can to supporting the troops in uniform and people working for the government and serving this great country. Again, you are going to love what Joe has to say, and it's also going to offer you a fresh perspective on selling to the government, right? So depending on what you sell, there's a lot of different ways that you are going to get involved in selling. You're going to hear some of the strategies that he uses, how important relationships are in what he does, and why he now can be picky about what he takes, right? So when you're good and people want you to do work for them, then you can have the ability to drive the price that you want and to pick and choose what you want to do. So again, strap in. This is going to be a great episode. Remember to head to dodcontract.com if you're looking for any help selling to the U.S. military or other federal government agencies. All right, now on to Dr. Joe.
Well, in my background, of course, I'm an Army officer, retired Army officer. Initially, I was an armor officer. I killed people for a living. Unlike my Italian grandfather who worked for the mafia, I did it legally for a year. And then the Army said, hey, you really speak well and you write well. How would you like to go to be a public affairs officer? In 1981, I went to the Fort Ben Harrison, the Defense Information School. DINFO's trained killer. I'm one of those. Did that in 1981, and I did it for another 21 years as a public affairs officer, retired as a lieutenant colonel. And then I did a stint in the federal government. A friend of mine sent me a resume or an application form to apply for the Defense Information School to be the Master Public Affairs Instructor and the Department of Defense Media Relations trainer. And the school was moving from Fort Ben Harrison all the way to Fort Meade, Maryland. And it's kind of like the inmates now take over the asylum. So I was hired. It took 15 interviews to get me on board. It was a grueling process, but it was a wonderful experience for 9 years. The school stood up at Fort Meade, the Defense Information School. I'm sure your listeners know that it trains all public affairs officers, enlisted and civilians and allies currently friendly with the United States in public affairs skills and training. Also photography and videography.
Okay.
And
they actually might not be aware. So we have a lot of small businesses that are selling, maybe have some initial sales or selling for the first time. Maybe you could talk a little bit about what a public affairs officer is in the military.
Sure. To me, a public affairs officer is three stools. That's what I was taught in 1981. It's still the same. We do community relations, advising and counseling, strategy and tactics. We do media relations, strategy and tactics. And we do what we call command information. And you being in the Air Force understand that command information is internal information. So it's the same thing that a corporation does. It has to involve itself and be part of the fabric in a community. It has to talk with its employees, which is critical. Internal information, so critical. And media relations, which has evolved so much from when I started in 1981, when we had traditional. We had newspapers, radio, TV, billboards, kind of a one-way flow. Now we have Twitter, LinkedIn, TikTok, Facebook, all those. We've got all these tools at our disposal. Public affairs officers, to me, are the people that basically develop the strategic communication plan for an organization that has objectives that are measurable, attainable, realistic. I also am a contractor for FEMA, and I've been doing that now 14 years. The The gentleman who hired me, God rest his soul, passed away in 2019. Phil Politano. I miss him terribly. I do all the public affairs training for FEMA public affairs officers, from the basic to our master class, which we're very, very proud of. It's in its 9th year. We have 135 master PIOs. But these people, to me, are the people that should sit next to the incident commander or the CEO and say, hey, boss, this is our strategic communication plan. This is what you need to do. And hopefully they listen to us. Of course, a lot of times they don't. But and then we see the failures in organizations.
Sure. Yeah, I think a lot of people listening might be surprised to find out that, if you've never been in the military, that, military personnel can't just take interviews, with a news organization or write an article or a book, even sometimes after they get out.
Sure.
What does that look like? I know, but you could probably actually teach me a little bit something here. So what does the public affairs officer, because I would always have to talk with them first before I gave an interview or something, as an active duty guy, what does that look like? How are you kind of shaping that for, that outside, outside narrative?
Well, to me, having been a public affairs officer for 21 years, you're the commander's representative. The commander is basically the person who runs their public affairs program. All we do is administer it. And as well as I know, Rick, that I was on the command staff. So I was special staff to the commander. I reported directly to the commander. Right. And that's where CEOs and organizations, you should have your public relations person right there at the policy table with you. And we fought for that. And you're right. I mean, if you're going to do an interview, we're going to work with you and say, okay, Rick, let's train you. Let's make sure you're ready. You're the subject matter expert. I know 2 organizations that I've done training with over the years. One is the United States Coast Guard. And they, unlike any other service other than the Marine Corps, and I'm the son of a Marine, so I know how to talk Marine. I got it. My dad's 92. He's a Korean War veteran. And again, the Coast Guard trains everybody in media relations from the lowest rank to the commandant. And their policy is a little bit different than ours. And I think the Air Force, the Army, the Navy need to adopt that policy. The Marines have adopted it. If it's your job, you can speak about it. If you know about it, you can speak about it. However, we do say at the end, make sure you talk to your public affairs officer before you do that, so we know you're talking. So again, it's critical.
That's a much more open policy than at least I experienced.
No, you're right.
I may delete this little side note from the podcast, or I don't know, maybe I'll leave it. But this is how I found out about the public affairs department. So when I joined in '99 the Air Force, so I joined as an officer. I went through officer training school, and then my next stop was flight school. Right, so I got reached out. NBC in the city we were in reached out to me and said they were doing a show called Bachelors in Uniform. So I was 24, and had a flight suit with no wings on it yet because I hadn't even got my wings. I'm like, can you just come on in uniform? And I went down there, and I was full on like Goodwill Hunting Boston, and I still remember coming into the flight squadron and talking to my flight training officer and telling him he's like, hey, what'd you guys do? I'm like, well, I just gave an interview with NBC. He's like, what? I went in uniform, and I could see there was a flight commander and assistant flight commander. The assistant flight commander was Navy. We were a joint school. And as I went on telling the story and the amazing BS that came out of my mouth, the Navy guy's smile was just, he could barely contain himself. And the Air Force major was just head was in his hands, about to explode, couldn't believe what had just happened. Needless to say, I was told not to do interviews. They pulled it. How
did they come out? Did they air it?
No, they our public affairs department called NBC and was basically like, hey, because I wasn't the only one. And hey, you can't. First of all, you can't do this. We aren't going to approve it, and we are in charge of improving. So you have to go something like this. So it never made the light of day. Although
shucks, your moment of fame, your 15-second of fame.
I know. But it seems like a really interesting career, interesting job, and obviously you've what you're doing now that you're out of the military still ties into that.
Yes.
Maybe we could talk a little bit about, hey, so, because you progressed from being, lieutenant colonel to, and I do have a couple of questions because, working with FEMA and the Coast Guard, you mentioned as a contractor, do you mean your business has a contract with those agencies, or you are like a government contractor, like a GS or a a contractor you go into work every day? And
No, under FEMA, they advertise courses, and FEMA they don't have the instructors, so they reach out to a cadre. You have to be certified by them to become an instructor. So I went through the program. Phil Politano accepted me and registered me as a contractor, as a registered, valid, credentialed instructor. You have to go through that program, and I did that 14 years ago. And then they do bids, so there's a bidding period that goes for like six. The window is going to open up again in November, and then it'll be for the courses in 2023, and they'll list them. I'm qualified to teach the basic PIO course, the advanced public affairs course, and the master's. And then just recently, I got a dream come true. I had two dreams when I left the military. One, I wanted to be a White House press secretary, and that'll never happen. But secondly, because I wrote my dissertation on James Haggerty, Eisenhower's press secretary, who's the greatest press secretary ever and still is, but that's a different story. And the second one I wanted to be not only a FEMA and contract instructor, I wanted to be an executive academy instructor. At Emergency Management Institute in Emmitsburg, it is the creme de la creme of Emergency Management Institute. It trains all the incident commanders, like we saw, and I hate to say this, all these terrible active shootings we have, an incident commander comes in. Those are the people I wanted to train. And last year, I got selected. So I guess now, and so I'm already on that contract. But for the FEMA public affairs ones, you have to bid. You have to send in a bid. There's a form, how much you can bid on. And I always push the envelope. I mean, because I think I'm worth a little bit more than what they, but I get a lot of them. It looks like I'm locked in on the master one. I'm the lead instructor for that one. And the executive academy folks, when they hired me, the person who hired me, Dr. Kelly Garrett, said, as far as I'm concerned, because I'm 68, he says, as far as I'm concerned, as long as you got breath in your body, you're going to teach here. So that's what, So, but the other one is a process where you actually bid, but you have to become a certified instructor. You have to go through the process. So, but it's not day to day. It's a long way of answering your question. Courses are anywhere from 4 days to 5 days, and you have to say and you bid on that. Sometimes I don't get it, but my wife has made me cut back a little bit, so I'm not taking the neck. So
I got you. No, it's interesting. There's so many different opportunities within the government, across industries. And I mean, we were just talking. I was on a podcast the other day. We were talking about just kind of things that people wouldn't normally assume or associate with, like military spending, right? Like we were looking at things like, speaking of social media, Facebook Live training. Tai Chi instructors, yoga. I mean, it really runs the gambit. And with yours, with training, is something that a lot of people do in different areas. Could you talk a little bit about how you first got into it? Because you registered your business. I think I saw that you're a service disabled veteran-owned small business.
Yes, I am.
Could you talk a little bit about what inclined your, how you got into it, how you found out about it, and kind of what your, process for winning contracts looked like?
Well, I left the Defense Information School in 2003, and I remember the commandant of the Defense Information School said, "You're crazy." I was a GS 13. I was making great money. I traveled the world. I actually trained Rumsfeld in 2000. I had him for 4 hours. I failed miserably in that 4-hour block of instruction, but I got to go to places like Norway and England and France. I traveled all over, Paraguay, Mexico. I mean, I was the DoD media relations trainer. But I thought in my soul, I thought, well, I really want to do my own thing. And it was scary because being in the military or being a DoD civilian, you got to check every 2 weeks. The pay was outstanding. I went from being a college professor making $36,000 a year to a GS employee making $96,000 a year. I mean, it's kind of like really, and then I didn't have to have the political BS that universities have, which absolutely infuriate me. So I always wanted to do that. So the last year I was at the Defense Information School, the commandant, for some reason, and I'm sure it's political, because I became bigger than life because my mobile training was so popular. I was asked for by name, and the commandant brought me in. I guess this is between us, and said, "Hey, I'm taking you off the podium." And all these clients that were used to me go, "We only want Dr. Joe." And he was not, he said, no, you're not getting him. So I thought, well, now's my time. So I
Yeah.
told my clients, I said, look, it looks like I'm not going to teach anymore. And I think I'm going to jump out. I think I'm going to resign my job. And they said, we will wait for you. We will wait for you.
Good.
So all of a sudden, everything dried up for the Defense Information School. And matter of fact, Victoria Clark, who was the Undersecretary for Public Affairs, asked to comment out, why did it dry up? And I was over in the corner, and she looked at me, said, Doc, what happened? I said, I was taken off the podium. I'll never forget that meeting in Pentagon. But the long story short, I decided I wanted to do it. It was scary. I went ahead and registered my company, became an LLC. And I told my clients I have to have so many months that I can't work with you. I think there was some sort of clause or something.
Right.
And after that was up, my God, they started lining up. So a lot of those clients I still have
Oh, great.
almost 19 years later. The relationships I formed. The Army Corps of Engineers has been my client for 19 years since I left. And I did stuff with them as a DoD civilian, as an Army officer. And matter of fact, I've got one in Alaska. I'm on a contract for another 5 years. I'm thinking, I'll be 73. You sure you want me? To say, yeah, but it's cold in Anchorage. So I tell them I'll go in May. But so to answer your question, I did the LLC. It was scary initially. I'd be very honest, because if I don't work, I don't have money. I mean,
Yeah.
it became, I'd saved a lot, but then it started and it just exploded. I think the big key to me is a relationship.
Yeah.
I think I've built this relationship with them that they know what they're getting. And again, I give them everything I can. But that's a long-winded way to answer it. I think an LLC is important. And then I got the $1 million insurance that I pay for.
Mhm.
Not that I'm not in a business that, well, I mean, what, you fall down and stick a pin in your eye or something? I don't know,
Yeah.
but I mean, I just want to cover my personal assets that they can only do so much. So
Yeah, no, you bring up a lot of good points there. And this is, small businesses tend to struggle initially because they don't realize it is a relationship game.
oh God, yes,
And, what they'll do is a common mistake is, they'll hear that there's a lot of government spending in small businesses. They'll register their company, and then they're just kind of waiting for solicitations to come out and bidding on them. And that's not, for most businesses, that's not an effective way of, consistently winning work. It's more kind of building those relationships ahead of time, learning what the upcoming opportunities are. And then for small businesses, everything isn't a competitive win either.
Yeah.
There's a lot of simplified acquisitions and whatnot. So how did you approach that initially because you had a lot of relationships in place already. So was it more, hey, I'm reaching out to these clients and seeing what's coming? And then when you did, were they initially competitive? I know some of them are now just based on what you told me, or were they giving you sole source contracts? How did that kind of work out?
I think I got a combination of what you talked about. I'd had relationships with people, and the government, they can write a sole source contract. Trahan and Associates is the one we want, and this is the skills he has. I did a lot of work in Canada, which I still do, and even the Canadian government. When you cross the border, when I went into St. John's the first time, I had to have a letter from St. John's Airport that I had a skill that a Canadian vendor does not have.
Oh.
I mean, so, and they brought me in a room. I thought I'm getting interrogated. Who are you? And I thank God I had this letter because I guess the government wants to make sure, and rightly so, they want to make sure their own people get those contracts rather than bringing somebody from another country.
Sure.
The sole source is there. The other thing too, I was beaten out by some contracts too. I remember there was a lieutenant that I taught at Dinfos that left Dinfos the same time I left, and he was in contact with me for 2 years. He went to Anchor, Turkey. He was an Air Force public affairs officer, became a captain, and he was so impressed with the way I taught. So he wrote this contract for me, basically. So I applied. And now Turkey, I'd never been to Turkey. I don't know if you've been to Turkey. So, I mean, I looked at the flight and everything. I mean, it was pretty expensive for me to fly over there, no less make some money. So I put in my bid, and this company in Virginia, who has 100 to 200 former military public affairs folks, beat me out by $100. They underbid me by $100.
Just to win.
And I called the contracting officer because I'm, like you said, I'm a disabled American veteran, a small business, and supposedly there's a set aside. And he said, well, you lost. That's what he told me. I said, oh, really? I mean, so this was a very large firm that could.
Yeah.
I mean, they've got much more power and resources than me. But yeah, so contract, so source contract. I've done that. I've
Mhm.
also bid, open bids with people as well. Sometimes you lose. I
Yeah.
mean, it's just you you just
It's good to talk about that too, because I often will say that I knew what company I wanted to hire before a solicitation ever went out. Almost always true. But a lot of people just listen to that piece and interpret that as, well, I knew this was all rigged. Well, it's not rigged, because I didn't always get to hire the company that I wanted
right,
to when I was an acquisitions officer. So
right,
I might know that I want to hire Dr. Joe.
right,
You might help me write that solicitation and put all the
right.
requirements in. But often I was not the one reviewing the proposals. Like, a lot of times you have a team, you have contracting officers, and it's very regulated. And if that's not written, sometimes it's price is the answer. Sometimes there's a requirement in there that just wasn't hit hard enough by a small business or a company, and maybe they just assumed they had it and they lose. So I mean, you can absolutely lose during that proposal process. But of course, you're much more likely to win if you wrote the solicitation with the CEO.
Well, and you're right. I mean, I had this. Thought I had the contract in Nashville Corps for a long time, and I did it for like 5 or 6 years, and then all of a sudden, a new contracting officer came in. And matter of fact, when I talked to him, honestly, he pretty much told me, "Well, you better get your pins ready. You're going to have to redo this." I mean,
Yeah.
I didn't get it. Okay, and of course, the public affairs officer was kind of upset because he was used to
Yeah.
having me come there. So they brought in some other people, but when they brought in 3 years of other people who were, and PAO said they didn't deliver the product.
Yeah.
So he went back to the contractor. I'm sorry, I need Dr. Joe.
Yeah.
Our people aren't being trained. So, and then the guy changed, but I've lost a lot. I've failed on some, which
Yeah.
is frustrating. Because now at my age, I, I don't worry anymore because FEMA keeps me pretty employed, and then I get solicitations from people. I don't even advertise anymore
Sure.
because I've reached a point. I mean, I get Social Security, I get my Army paycheck, and I'm fine.
Yeah.
So, but when I was getting started, it would frustrate me because I was used to a certain lifestyle, and then all of a sudden, I'm not getting the money. So, for anybody going in small business, you need some sort of reserve. To me, and I taught myself from 2003. I would pay myself. I would invest my own money. I would put aside a certain amount, and I'd put the rest in there. I
Yeah.
mean, that's what I did. I mean,
It's good. It's really good advice. And I mean, it's nice having, being in a position you're in, right? If you have a military retirement, if you have Social Security, if you have other streams of income
yeah,
coming in, then that can offset, some of the fluctuation in, selling to the government. What a lot of small businesses do is they will start with their commercial sales and then start slowly expanding into government. One question I had for you is: do you are you involved with commercial sales at all? Do you sell to other businesses or?
oh yeah. I do
Yeah.
corporations. I get calls. Matter of fact, while we were on the phone, while we were on the call, I've had 3 people contact me. We want a proposal from you, and I'm being very selective because
Yeah.
I've got a granddaughter I want to goof off with. I mean, I got quality, and I'm being real restrictive. I hate to say, and sometimes I give a price that's even higher now because something. Why? I mean,
Yeah.
I don't need. If they tell me no, I'm okay with that. I
Oh yeah.
mean, it's just next week I'm uh, going to Dallas, and next week I'm going to Florida to work for the Corps. They contacted me out of the blue. And they want me to do this next week, and I said, well, it's going to cost this. They said, okay. They just sold contract. I'm flying in on the 1st of November to West Palm Beach, doing the training on the 2nd, flying out on the 3rd. Plane ticket was unbelievably high. They said, that's fine. This is how much we got, which is much more. But,
Yeah.
to me, it becomes a point. It's really scary as an entrepreneur. I mean, commercial sales, I charge more. I mean, if you're a major corporation like Coca-Cola or Delta or something like, I'm going to charge you my top fee. I
Sure.
do cut the rate for the government. I cut it for the national government. I cut it for the state, county, city. I mean, I just feel that I should. If I do nonprofits, I charge like a small honorarium and travel.
Right.
That's all. I mean, I don't know. But if you're a major Fortune 500 company, I'm sorry, you get my full rate. I'm to
And
me.
then, look, that's in line with it's not with every kind of, well, I'll call it industry that sells to the government, but a lot of businesses selling to the government will have a GSA schedule, and
Yes.
they have their
Yeah.
published GSA rates, and that's what they use for the government, right?
Right.
But then
That's
when
right.
it's going to maybe a subcontractor or a or just regular commercial sales, those GSA rates do not apply, right?
That's right.
That's right. Something else interesting, and maybe you have or have not experienced this, but with training, and I've seen this with one-off trainings where, hey, we just need you to come in for a week and teach X, you know what I mean? But a lot of times what will happen is a small business will build their travel costs into their pricing for the bid. Do you ever get to do that, or is that usually?
Well, the core gives me one rate, and do like what I'm doing the first weekend in November, and they said, here's the amount, which covers quite nicely my my travel and also a fee that's a good fee. Now with FEMA, we've been discussing this. There's a one fee when you bid on it. You can only go higher. Well, the top is $3,500, which isn't a lot of money. Yeah. And I'm usually going to have to fly someplace. They were just in state of Washington in August. I couldn't go, but by the time you flew out there, by the time you stayed in a hotel, food, rental car, and all what the travel costs are, it eats up your profit. You might walk away with $500. Which is hardly. So we as contractors have been pushing FEMA to say, you got to raise this, because it's been that level for a long time. And so that includes your fee plus travel. Now, if you teach it at Emmitsburg, at the Emergency Management Institute in Emmitsburg, Maryland, on the border of Pennsylvania and Maryland, then you get free lodging. So again, it's not the greatest, but it's at least you have your own bathroom. I mean, so right. It's not your bed. It's and they don't pay for your travel. The meals are discounted, but they're still high.
Yeah.
But so to answer your question, as some people say, okay, I want you give me the full amount, and I bid the full amount, include my travel. And then some people say they break it out by what's your professional fee and what's your travel expenses. So gotcha. I've done both.
Yeah, every acquisition shop is a little bit different. So it could certainly, you just kind of got to pivot to what they want, what the flavor of the day is,
And one thing, Rick, before you go on that one, and as well as I do, every place has a per diem rate.
Sure.
Of course, when you work like Anchorage, Alaska, the per diem's pretty high. So I try to stay within, I guess because of my old military ways, I try to, and being a government employee, I mean, we can only get, and this, you only get so much per diem rate. Of course, that's why people go to McDonald's and big meals. They try to make up that per diem. But like Anchorage is a high per diem rate. Washington, sure. D.C. I mean, the places that are. So a lot of times if it's with the federal government, I try to stay within that per diem rate for hotels. I do the best I can. Sometimes I don't do it. Sometimes I do. So
yeah, no, that's man. You're throwing out a lot of gold here that we haven't talked about on the podcast. You just reminded me of a small business I worked with. That again, it was with the training and the way we built their travel into that. Because a lot of small businesses will say, "Well, how do I come up with the pricing information?" One thing you can do is, if it's depending on what you're selling. You can go look at the GSA scheduled published rates of different companies, and you can, although sometimes they underbid those, you could start getting an idea of what the pricing looks like. Another thing you can do, like with travel, like you just said, is look at the per diem rate, the government per diem rate or the military per diem rate associated with, like if you're teaching at a base or if you're going to a certain area, and they'll tell you what it is, and you can see like, hey, what are you going to get a day? What's authorized as far as hotel fees and whatnot. Sure. Certainly, when me and you were in the military, we had to get all that approved, and
we had to.
I could only stay in certain hotels.
That's right. And then you had to get authorization if you had to go above it.
Yep.
I know my unit, I was in the 314th press camp. We deployed for Hurricane Andrew, and they told us, well, this is your per diem rate. Well, we showed up after the hurricane. There was only certain hotels open to house my unit. So I had to go before the finance people. Well, why is this rate $200 higher? Well, where do you want my people to stay?
Yeah.
We don't have tents. This place just went through a hurricane. This hotel's operational. Well, it's $200 a night. So what? Well, they ended up, I had to get authorization to do just what you said. Yep. They were not happy with me, but I didn't care. I wanted to take care of my people. Exactly. That's what I said, hey, you want us here? We'll just pack our bags and leave. We're here to help deal with this and help the people doing this after this hurricane.
Yeah, no, I mean, again, that's a good point as well. I mean, we would, typically if we were going to a base, we would first shoot for the base hotel. And granted,
Right.
the Air Force hotels.
Oh man, yeah, baby.
You know,
Whenever they say you training on an Air Force base, I go, yeah,
yeah.
I'll stay in their hotel. That's a 5-star hotel.
Absolutely. You know, if I'm going to McDill in Tampa, I mean, I'm right on the ocean right there. You know, that's you know, a vacation for me and my wife. But
Oh man, that's a nice place.
oh, it really is. It really is. But you know, if that hotel, if the base hotel isn't there, we would just get a letter saying, hey, we don't have any occupancy. If the hotels that they're recommending don't, you get that, and then we start going kind of right up the chain. So, and a small business probably wouldn't even have to go through that rigmarole. You could start looking at the fees, what's available, and just know that, you know, depending on who you're working with, you could probably get that added to
That's right.
on certain contracts. No, that's awesome. That's awesome. So, Dr. Joe, what do you got going on now? What's next for you? You talked about some contracts.
I'm going next week to the Corps. I'm doing that, and then December we're kicking off the first week of the 3-week masterclass for FEMA. It'll be at Emmitsburg. We have 22 new master PIOs. We just graduated that class in September, and it looks like 2023 is shaping up to be really busy. I've got a friend of mine who was in the Air Force who started his own firm called Fireside Partners that deals with a crisis. I met him when he left the Air Force and went to work for the National Transportation Safety Board. He was the training officer, and he's a retired Air Force person like yourself, a great guy, Don Chepp, and he's got me at something I think in March, and then it's just filling up all of a sudden during my 2023, and then the Corps go back to Alaska in May. I'm glad it's May. I went in February one time in Anchorage. It was cold. So
I bet, yeah.
I said, hey, let's go back in May. And they said, okay, let's do May. So the ice is breaking up. So you know, I think my schedule is still going to be pretty robust. The master class, that's 3 of them, one in December, then there'll be one in April or August, and then one in September. The Executive Academy's got me 4 times at Emmitsburg. So I'm not lacking for anything.
Oh, it sounds like it. It sounds like it. Well, hey, if there's a small business out there or somebody wanted to see if you were available for your services, what's the best way to contact you? Is it through LinkedIn, email?
Yeah, they can do LinkedIn. They can do my email, joe_Cajun@yahoo.com. They can call me. I like talking on the phone, 410-908-3036. They can also go to the website, www.doctrahanmedia.com. They can do that. But an email and directly to me is fine. I'll be glad to chat with them.
Fantastic. Well, we will put all of that in the show notes so anyone can reach out to you. It's been an honor and privilege. It's been awesome talking with you, and I love talking with other veterans too.
Well, thank you for doing this. Thank you, and thank you for your service. God bless you.
I appreciate that. Well, thanks everyone for listening to DoD Contract Academy this week. We had a great conversation with Dr. Joe. Everything's going to be in the show notes. Remember, if you want help selling to the U.S. government or the U.S. military, go to dodcontract.com. There we have a lot of different programs you can register for, and we're going to be opening up enrollments in a couple of weeks. So we will see you then.